Welcome back, everyone, to the Arthashastra series. It's great to be diving back into Kautilya's world with you. Last time, remember, we kind of got our feet wet, right? Exploring those foundational principles of statecraft that he lays out. But today, we're going deeper.
Deeper, absolutely. We're plunging headfirst into part two,
Yeah,
the state, its constituent elements and threats to them.
right. I mean, just the title itself. It's like Kautilya saying, all right, here's the blueprint for what makes a kingdom strong, and here's everything that can make it crumble,
Yeah.
No messing around. And you shared some really fascinating excerpts with me from this part. So our mission today is to unpack all these core ideas and see what wisdom, if any, still speaks to us today.
And what strikes you immediately when you get into this part of the Arthashastra is Kautilya's very practical, down-to-earth approach. He doesn't beat around the bush. He begins with a very fundamental truth. There cannot be a country without people, and there is no kingdom without a country.
It seems kind of obvious, right? But he's laying the groundwork here.
He is. It's that inseparable connection between the land and the people who inhabit it.
And he reinforces that connection with a very powerful image, doesn't he? He says, "It is the people who constitute a kingdom, like a barren cow. A kingdom without people yields nothing." I mean, that's pretty stark, isn't it?
It is. It makes you realize why certain elements of the state are given such priority, why their well-being is so crucial. It's not just about conquering land. It's about ensuring the vitality, the productivity of the people who live on that land.
And that perspective, that really informs, I think, the entire structure of part two.
It does. You see Kautilya then laying out his theory of the state, identifying what he considers to be the 7 essential elements. 6 of these are internal. They're the core.
Mm.
The king, the ministers, he refers to them as amacha,
Okay.
the territory and the population,
Yeah.
Janapada,
Pradapada, yeah.
the fortified city, the Durga, the treasury, Kosa, and the army. And then there's the 7th element, the ally, which is the only one that's external.
So you've got these 6 internal elements, each with its own specific role, all working together. And then the ally is that external support system that you can call on. It's a pretty clear breakdown. Now, after establishing these components, Kautilya then turns his attention to, well, what can weaken or destroy them, right?
Absolute
Calamities, vyasana, as he calls them.
Yes, Anani, yeah. So what exactly is a calamity in Kautilya's view? How does he define that?
For Kautilya, a calamity is anything that diminishes the strength, the effectiveness of one of those core elements of the state. And he emphasizes this very important responsibility that a leader has
A responsibility
to anticipate potential problems, to prevent them if possible, to overcome them when they do arise, and very importantly, to remove any obstacles that hinder the state's economic activities, its ability to generate revenue.
Right. You can't run a state without resources.
Hmm.
And this focus on economic activity, that's pretty insightful, isn't it? It speaks to how practical Kautilya's thinking is. It does. A strong state needs a solid financial foundation.
Absolutely. And it's not just about filling the coffers for its own sake. He also talks about the ruler's obligations towards their subjects, right? This threefold duty, Rakshana, protection, Palana, administration, and Yogashema, which is welfare. It's a very holistic view of governance.
It is. What's also quite striking is how broadly Kautilya defines what constitutes a calamity.
Meaning, like what kinds of things?
It's not just invasions or natural disasters.
Right, right.
He specifically includes things like the royal family, officials harassing the population. That shows a real understanding of how fragile a state can be from within.
So it's not just external threats that you need to be wary of. It's also about keeping your own house in order.
Precise.
Okay, so we have these essential building blocks. We have these things that can go wrong. And then, of course, there's the personal conduct of the ruler, the inner circle.
Yes, even personal vices.
Vices, things like anger, excessive desire. He doesn't see these as just personal failings, but as potential threats to the state itself. So it's a pretty comprehensive framework he's presenting here, isn't it?
It is.
All right, well, let's delve a little deeper into these 7 constituent elements, shall we? Starting with, well, what Kautilya lays out as the most important. The king.
Yes, the king. Kautilya paints a very detailed picture of the ideal king, and it's quite a checklist.
Oh, I bet. Like, what kind of things are we talking about?
Well, first, leadership qualities. Things like noble birth, good fortune, intelligence, prowess, righteousness.
Okay, so we're setting a high bar already.
We are. Truthfulness, resoluteness, enthusiasm, discipline, gratitude, lofty aims, being decisive.
Wow, it's a pretty demanding job description.
It is. He even stresses the importance of being stronger than neighboring kings.
Stronger. Oh, that's interesting.
And of course, having high-quality ministers, you can see already how interconnected these elements are.
Right from the get-go. So you need to be, what, a sort of a superhero of statecraft?
It seems that way. And then there's the intellectual side. A genuine desire to learn, being a good listener, really taking in information,
Being able to process it?
grasping, retaining, understanding, reflecting, and, very importantly, rejecting false ideas.
Not being easily misled. Okay, so intellect is more than just having a lot of knowledge. It's about using it wisely.
Exactly. It's critical thinking, sound judgment.
Right, and then you can't just be a thinker, right? You got to be a doer.
Absolutely. That's where energy comes in. Valor, determination, quickness, dexterity.
Right, so you got to have the brains and the brawn. What else?
Personal attributes.
Yeah.
Eloquence, being able to communicate effectively, boldness, sharp intellect.
So intelligence is so important it comes up twice.
It does. A strong memory, a keen mind, being open to guidance, training in arts and military leadership,
Well-rounded.
being just in rewards and punishments, having foresight,
Meaning.
being able to anticipate challenges, both in times of peace and in times of crisis.
Okay, so always thinking ahead.
Always. And he doesn't stop there. He goes into very specific conduct, knowing when to wage war, when to make peace, when to bide your time.
It's like a strategy manual.
It is. How to observe treaties, when to strike at an enemy's weakness, preserving your dignity, being sweet in your speech, looking people in the eye, avoiding frowns.
These might seem like minor details, but they all contribute to your presence, your demeanor.
They do. And then there are the negative qualities,
Yeah.
things you must avoid as a leader.
Like
Uncontrolled passion, anger, greed, obstinacy.
things that can cloud your judgment.
Exactly. Fickleness,
Mm.
backbiting, those undermine trust. And a very important point, following the advice of elders.
So valuing wisdom and experience.
Always. The key takeaway here is this. Even if all the other elements are perfect, a weak or wicked king can ruin everything. But, conversely, a wise king can elevate even imperfect elements. It all comes down to leadership.
Powerful stuff. It really underscores how crucial the ruler is in Kautilya's system. All right, moving on to the second element, counselors and ministers, the amacha.
The Amacha, yes.
What does Kautilya look for in these key advisors?
He emphasizes them being natives of the state, coming from respected families, and, importantly, being controllable, loyal to the king.
So you had to be able to trust them.
Absolutely. Training in various arts, logical thinking, intelligence, perseverance, dexterity,
Okay, so they got to be competent, capable.
eloquent, energetic,
Yeah.
bold, brave, able to endure hardship.
Sounds like a tough job.
It is. And again, unwavering loyalty. They should also be neither arrogant nor unreliable, approachable, and not someone who stirs up hatred.
So not divisive figures. Okay, so you need people who are not just good at their jobs, but also have the right character.
Exactly. And he even lays out a system for their appointment based on how many of these qualities they possess.
So the ones with all the qualities, they get the top jobs.
And the ones who might be lacking in some areas, they're more suited for middle or lower level roles.
Okay, so kind of a hierarchy based on merit. And what are their actual roles? What do they do?
Well, they assist in deliberation. They oversee policy implementation. They manage revenue collection, maintain law and order, contribute to defense.
Crazy people.
They handle disasters, safeguard the princes, ensure a smooth succession. They are, in essence, the backbone of the administration.
So they keep everything running smoothly. Now, the third element, the territory and the population, the Janapada.
The Janapada. This is the foundation of all economic activity.
Right. It's the land and the people who work it. So what does an ideal Janapada look like?
It should be self-sufficient, capable of supporting its own people and any outsiders during a crisis, easily defensible.
So naturally secure.
Yes, strong enough to exert influence over neighboring territories. The land should be productive, free from unproductive terrain,
Right.
areas that are difficult to cultivate or where the population might be unproductive or unruly.
Got it.
Beauty is also mentioned.
Beauty. Interesting.
This refers to arable land, mines, timber, and elephant forests, good pastures.
Okay, so it's not just about utility, but also about the inherent richness of the land.
Precisely.
And water sources, right? You need those.
Absolutely. Reliable water sources, a good network of roads and waterways.
Infrastructure is key.
It is. For trade, communication, movement of your forces, a thriving economy with diverse commodities, high tax revenue.
To support the administration and the army.
And the population itself should be hardworking, honest, loyal.
The kind of people you want as your citizens.
Primarily agriculturists, artisans, craftsmen,
Mhm.
led by intelligent local leaders.
So a picture of a stable, prosperous, resilient society.
Exactly, the bedrock of your kingdom.
The foundation. Okay, now we come to the fourth element. Fortified towns and cities. The Durga.
The Durga. These are primarily centers of protection
Defensive positions.
against external threats. They house the treasury, the army, they offer refuge during conflict.
Safe havens.
Kautilya goes into great detail about their planning and construction in other parts of the text.
Highlighting their strategic importance.
So they're not just military outposts, they're vital for maintaining stability.
Right. They protect the heart of the kingdom. Next. The treasury. The kosa.
The Kosa. This represents the state's wealth.
Acquired through legitimate means, I assume?
Of course, inheritance or the king's own efforts. It should consist of gold, silver, gems, coinage,
Valuable assets.
and the crucial thing is its size.
It needs to be large enough, too.
To withstand prolonged periods of hardship, even without any income.
It's like a rainy day fund for the entire kingdom.
You could see that.
Okay, on to the sixth element. The forces, the army.
The army, above all, loyalty is key here.
Makes sense. You need soldiers who will fight for you.
Soldiers who are loyal to the king and his lineage. Strong, obedient, capable of long campaigns, enduring hardship.
They need to be tough.
Skilled in weapons, experienced in battle. Their family should be well cared for.
So they're content, focused on their duties.
Their loyalty is absolute. They share in both the king's prosperity and adversity.
So it's not just about numbers, it's about the quality of the troops.
Absolutely.
And finally, the seventh element, the only external one, the ally.
The ally. Ideally, this is someone who has a long-standing relationship with the king's family.
A trusted friend.
Someone who has consistently offered support. There should be open to influence from the king.
So there's a degree of control there.
Yes. Powerfully supportive when needed, sharing common interests.
A true partner.
Able to mobilize quickly and, crucially, trustworthy.
You don't want an ally who might betray you.
Exactly. So it's about building those reliable external partnerships that benefit the state.
Okay, so each element has a specific role, a set of ideal characteristics, and Kautilya really emphasizes the interconnections between them. But of course, things can go wrong. That's where the adversities, the calamities come in.
Yes, and that's where his practical wisdom really shines through.
So how does he approach these potential problems?
He defines a calamity as anything that weakens one of those essential elements.
Reduces its strength, its effectiveness.
Right. And these calamities can come from various sources. Acts of nature, actions of other people, misfortune, bad policies.
A pretty wide range.
He includes situations where an element has the opposite of its ideal characteristics.
So instead of being strong, it's weak.
The absence of a crucial element altogether. Significant internal weaknesses, like a disaffected population.
Unhappy people can destabilize a kingdom.
Absolutely. The king's own personal vices. And, of course, natural disasters.
It's a very comprehensive way of looking at potential threats.
And then he gets into this fascinating discussion about the relative seriousness of these calamities.
So which ones are worse than others?
There's this debate among various teachers. For instance, Haradava argues that a calamity affecting a minister is worse than one affecting the king
Because
because of the minister's extensive responsibilities.
you're the ones actually running things day to day.
But Kautilya counters by saying, no, the king is still ultimately responsible.
He appoints the ministers, directs policy, handles crises.
His qualities influence everything else.
Yeah.
Then you have Vishalaksha arguing that a calamity affecting the Janapada is the worst.
The land and the people, because
Because it's the source of everything, the treasury, the army, the resources.
without the Janapada, you have nothing.
But Kautilya says, well, all state activities ultimately benefit the Janapada.
And those activities originate with the king and his ministers.
It's this back and forth, this exploration of different perspectives that I find really interesting.
Me too. And it continues, right? Janapada versus the forts. Forts versus the treasury. Treasury versus the army. Army versus the ally. It's like he's stress testing his whole model.
He is looking for every potential point of failure.
And what's really insightful is how he always brings it back to those fundamental dependencies. Like Pisuna thinks a calamity affecting the treasury is the worst.
Because forts rely on finance.
But Kautilya points out that forts protect the treasury and the army, so they're more crucial for overall security.
And Kanapadanta prioritizes the army.
But Kautilya says the army depends on the treasury for payment and supplies.
So ultimately, finance is more important.
And the debate about allies is really nuanced.
Bhattacharya thinks a calamity affecting an ally is the most critical because of the support they offer.
They're your backup.
But Kautilya points out that allies can be unreliable.
Especially if you need to act quickly.
And ultimately, a strong army is more important.
You have to be able to rely on your own strength.
Exactly.
So it's a complex issue. Now, while Kautilya generally agrees that calamities affecting those earlier elements are more serious,
The king, the ministers.
he does introduce some nuance.
He acknowledges that context matters. The relative strength of your agricultural versus martial population can affect things.
And a weakened element is always more vulnerable.
Of course.
And he points out that you have more control over your internal constituents than your allies.
Allies can be fickle.
Right. Now, what about an element that's only partially affected?
He says it can still be useful.
You just have to focus on saving the most important parts.
The most loyal, the most valuable.
And when two elements are equally affected,
The one with the potential for increasing damage, or the one that might affect other elements, that's the priority.
okay, so it's about assessing the risks,
And during a military campaign,
where you have to make tough choices.
you protect your ally first, then your army, then your treasury.
Prioritizing within each based on loyalty and value. So it's a very pragmatic approach to crisis management and the overarching principle.
Any calamity that threatens the very survival of the state, that overrides everything else.
Okay, so existential threats take precedence. Now, let's talk about those specific calamities of the population. The Janapada Vyasanani.
This is where you see Kautilya's concern for the well-being of the people.
Right. It's not just about protecting the state as an abstract entity.
He divides these calamities into two types: those caused by nature and those caused by people.
Natural disasters versus human actions. So, starting with acts of God, what are the main threats?
Fire, floods, diseases, epidemics, famine. But also things like rats, wild animals, snakes, evil spirits.
A whole range of dangers. And what does he recommend doing about them?
Well, he suggests both practical measures and more traditional approaches.
Like what? Give me some examples.
For fire, he suggests cooking outdoors in the summer, having firefighting equipment ready.
Makes sense.
Propitiating the fire deity, Agni.
Right, the religious aspect.
For floods, he recommends relocation, rescue efforts, worship of Varuna, the water god.
So appeasing the relevant deities.
For diseases, he suggests physicians, purificatory rites, occult experts, offerings to the gods.
It's a combination of practical and spiritual responses.
For famine, he lays out a whole strategy: distributing royal food stores, food for work programs, sharing stocks, commandeering private supplies if needed.
Wow, that's pretty comprehensive.
Seeking help from allies, relocation, even encouraging migration.
So doing everything possible to alleviate the suffering.
Absolutely. And for other threats, he recommends things like introducing predators to control pests, using poison for dangerous animals, employing poison experts for snake bites, exorcism for evil spirits.
It really shows how much he cared about protecting the population.
It does.
And of course, there's the debate about which natural calamities are the worst.
Fire versus floods, disease versus famine.
Kautilya generally considers floods and famine more serious.
Because of their impact on agriculture, livelihood, and ultimately state revenue.
They affect the whole system.
Right.
Now, what about those calamities caused by people? What are some of the internal threats that Kautilya identifies?
Well, he talks about depredations by your own army or by enemy forces, internal strife, both among the people and within the royal family.
So conflict within the state itself.
A decadent populace versus a decadent king, harassment by queens, mistresses, princes, rebellious guilds, or chiefs.
That's a lot to worry about.
It is, and he analyzes each one, weighing the relative danger.
For example.
Well, some might say civil unrest is the worst.
Because it divides the people.
But Kautilya says those quarrels can be resolved. Royal family conflicts, on the other hand, those are harder to deal with.
Because they cause wider harm.
And a decadent king, he's more dangerous than a pleasure-seeking populace.
Because he has the power to impoverish the whole state.
Exactly. He also compares rebellious guilds and chiefs.
Which are worse.
He says chiefs are more destructive, they're more powerful, more difficult to control.
Okay. What about corrupt officials?
He distinguishes between harassing administrators and revenue collectors. He says administrators are a bigger problem, they have more power.
And he compares dishonest customs officials with traders who engage in price gouging.
He sees the traders as more harmful. They exploit the situation for profit.
Interesting. What about the seizure of common land?
He said it's better to reclaim that land than to use it as pasture,
Because.
because nobles who seize land can become too powerful.
And pasture land is still useful for the treasury, for transport animals.
As long as it doesn't interfere with crop production.
Right, there needs to be a balance. What about marauders?
He compares highway robbers with jungle tribes.
Which are worse.
He says the tribes are more dangerous. They're organized. They're brave. They operate openly. They can challenge the king's authority.
Okay, so they're a more serious threat.
He also talks about the dangers of different types of forests.
Like those with lots of elephants.
Those are especially difficult to manage. And he addresses the question of who to prioritize during a calamity.
Who gets help first?
He says your own people should always come first. Helping others, even allies, can backfire.
It makes you vulnerable.
He also talks about the loss of leaders.
Wise and courageous chiefs.
He says that's a bigger blow than losing ordinary people.
Because leaders are harder to replace.
Exactly. So it's a very detailed, nuanced view of internal threats.
A lot for a ruler to keep in mind. Now, finally, we come to the vices.
Vices. These arise from ignorance, indiscipline.
Not understanding the consequences of your actions.
He categorizes them based on anger and desire. 3 from anger, 4 from desire.
Okay, so 7 deadly sins, Arthashastra style.
He says anger is generally worse because it's boundless.
When you're angry, you can do anything.
Angry kings face the wrath of the people. Greedy or lustful kings, they might just suffer from disease, poverty, or enemies.
So their vices might not directly lead to their downfall?
But Faravaja disagrees. He says both anger and desire can be positive.
How so?
Anger can motivate you to do what's right. Desire can push you to achieve success.
So there's a good side to these things.
But Kautilya counters that. No, for a ruler, anger leads to hatred, enemies, suffering.
It clouds your judgment.
And greed, lust, they lead to humiliation, loss of wealth, bad company.
So they can corrupt you.
He says being hated is worse than being humiliated. Having enemies is worse than losing wealth. And suffering from vices is worse than just keeping bad company.
So anger is still the bigger threat.
Now, he breaks down the anger-based vices.
Which are?
Verbal injury, property injury, physical injury. Vishalasha thinks verbal injury is the worst.
Words can hurt.
But Kautilya says destroying property is worse.
It affects people's livelihoods.
Parasar's followers think any property violation is the worst.
Because wealth is the foundation of everything.
But Kautilya concludes that physical injury is the most serious.
Because life is more valuable than property.
And physical harm often leads to retaliation.
So it creates more instability.
Now, the desire-based vices, hunting, gambling, women, drink.
Those are classic vices.
Kasuna thinks hunting is the worst.
Because
It's dangerous. You could run into robbers, enemies, elephants. You could get lost, hungry, thirsty.
So there are a lot of risks.
He thinks gambling is less dangerous because you can predict the winners.
Okay, so it's more controlled.
But Kautilya disagrees. He says gambling always leads to losses,
You can't win forever.
and it creates enemies.
When people lose money, they get angry.
He acknowledges some benefits of hunting.
Like exercise, skill development, knowledge of animals.
But overall, gambling is worse
Kautilya thinks gambling is worse than lust for women.
because gambling is a constant addiction.
With women, you can at least reason with them, influence them.
And if they're bad, you can get rid of them.
Harsh, but that was the thinking back then.
But Kautilya disagrees. He says lust can blind you to reality.
You stop thinking clearly.
You neglect your work, you lose your dharma, your wealth, your political acumen,
So it affects your whole life.
and it can lead to drinking,
One vice leads to another.
which makes reform difficult. Vatavyadi thinks lust is worse than drinking.
Because foolish women can be dangerous.
But drinking can be pleasurable, it can foster affection, honor your followers, relieve fatigue.
So there are some perceived benefits.
Kautilya says, no, relationships with your own women are beneficial.
They give you children, they protect you.
But outside women, forbidden women, they lead to problems.
You can get attached to them, make bad decisions.
And he lists the negative effects of drinking. Loss of senses, health problems, madness, shamelessness, social isolation, harmful associations.
So that really degrades you.
Excessive indulgence leads to loss of wealth, learning, intellect, strength, friends.
You lose everything.
He concludes that gambling is worse than drinking because it creates factions, strife. especially in oligarchies. It can destroy governance.
So it undermines the whole system.
But in general, the order of desire-based vices, from worst to best, is drink, lust, gambling, hunting.
So drinking is the most dangerous.
Excessive desire cultivates evil. Anger makes you abandon good.
Mm.
Both lead to a lot of problems, and they're both classified as calamities.
Things to be avoided at all costs.
Kings need to control themselves. They need wise counsel to guide them. Otherwise, they'll destroy their kingdoms.
It's a powerful warning.
So this deep dive into part 2 of the Arthashastra has shown us how an ancient Indian state was supposed to function.
And all the things that could go wrong.
It's not just theory, it's a practical guide for rulers.
How to navigate a complex world, how to weigh different priorities, how to manage risks.
The discussions about calamities, about vices, they're surprisingly relevant even today.
They make you think about leadership, about governance.
What are the essential components of any organized system? What are the potential weaknesses? How do you protect yourself?
We've only scratched the surface here, but hopefully you have a better understanding of Kautilya's thinking.
These ideas about power, governance, leadership, they're still relevant.
They make you think about how societies function, how to avoid disaster.
A ruler must always be prepared for war.
Always.
Always. For him, military strength wasn't just like a nice to have. It was absolutely essential for the state's survival. Its stability.
So not necessarily looking for a fight, but ready for one.
Precisely. It wasn't about starting trouble, but ensuring security, being ready.
Okay. And it wasn't just about having a big army, was it? His view seems much broader.
Oh, definitely. Much broader. Warfare, for Kautilya, demanded meticulous planning, real strategy, foresight, thinking through all the possibilities in any military decision.
It was about the long game.
Exactly, the long game for state security.
And when he talks specifics, the actual military unit.
Yeah, he was quite specific.
Yeah.
He breaks down the importance and the different roles of, infantry, cavalry,
Yeah.
and interestingly, elephants.
Elephants, right. Always fascinating.
But just having them wasn't enough. He really hammered home the need for rigorous training, strict discipline, and adaptability, being able to change tactics on the fly.
Because an undisciplined army is useless, no matter how big.
Totally ineffective.
Yeah.
Adaptability was key.
Okay, now here's something I found really interesting. His focus on terrain. The physical battlefield itself.
Oh, yes. Huge emphasis on that.
It wasn't just a backdrop. Rivers, mountains, forests. He saw these as strategic assets, didn't he?
Absolutely. They weren't just scenery. They were tools. Tools for defense. Tools for launching surprise attacks.
Like using a forest to hide troops for an ambush.
Exactly that kind of thinking. Kautilya understood that geography could be a force multiplier. It could make a smaller, well-positioned army much more formidable.
That principle feels timeless, leveraging your environment, whether it's land or, I don't know, market conditions today.
It really is. Understanding and using geography gave a massive advantage. You could strengthen your position, create opportunities the enemy just wouldn't see coming. It's about thinking ahead, using what's there.
And it wasn't all just physical force and terrain, was it? He talked about the psychological side, too.
Yes. What we'd call psychological warfare today. He got the importance of, instilling fear in enemies, undermining their morale through deception, misinformation.
A confused enemy is easier to beat.
Definitely at a disadvantage. And crucially, this went hand in hand with keeping up the morale and loyalty of your own troops.
Right, keep your side motivated.
A confident, motivated army is much more resilient, which leads us naturally to another fundamental piece, espionage.
Spies, always a good topic.
Kautilya saw a spy network, men, women, using disguises, all sorts of clever methods, as absolutely essential, non-negotiable.
What was their main job?
Gathering intelligence.
Yeah.
Enemy movements, plans, weaknesses, everything. It's all about knowing your opponent inside out. He even detailed different types, spies disguised as merchants, holy men, even entertainers.
Wow, a multi-layered approach.
Very much so. Information is power, right? Especially in conflict. Having eyes and ears inside the enemy camp lets you anticipate moves, plan countermeasures. It's proactive.
That proactive stance seems to be a running theme. Okay, so no state exists in a vacuum. What about allies? Diplomacy.
He had clear ideas there, too, especially in a military context. It wasn't just your own strength, but who was backing you up.
So alliances based on shared interests.
Yes, he saw them as a critical source of military support. But, and this is important, he cautioned against rushing into alliances or making deals that could hurt the state long term.
Always prioritize your own kingdom's interests.
Always. That was the bottom line.
Okay, so you've got your trained army, you understand the terrain, using psych tactics, got your spies, maybe some allies.
Yeah.
Then comes the actual fighting. Any specific tactics Kautilya highlighted?
Oh, yeah. He outlined various approaches: deception, ambushes, surprise attacks, even detailed siege warfare tactics.
So not just head-on battles.
No, and what's really insightful is his emphasis that victory wasn't just about winning big battles. It was often about outsmarting, outmaneuvering the enemy through superior strategy, better preparation. Sometimes the best victory is won without a massive fight.
Which makes me think about the practical side actually equipping the army.
Absolutely crucial. Kautilya stressed having a well-equipped force, best available weapons, good armor, and critically reliable supply lines. Food, water, medical provisions.
Logistics.
Logistics win wars or lose them. A hungry, poorly armed force won't last long, no matter how well trained they are.
And for long-term security, defense was just as important as offense. Fortifications.
Definitely. Investing in strong defenses was key. Fortresses, strategically placed based on geography and likely enemy approaches.
Not just walls, but well-manned walls.
Exactly. Manned by well-trained soldiers, ready to defend. It's about layers of security.
Okay, let's say the war is fought, hopefully won. What then? Did Kautilya think about the aftermath? Conquered territories?
He did. This is where governance and military strategy really blend together. He stressed the need for strong administration in those new lands.
Managing the locals.
Active management, yeah, and responding swiftly to any resistance. Plus, keeping your own army loyal was crucial for long-term stability. It's about turning that conquest into, well, lasting integration.
So, wow, from battlefield tactics to managing conquered people, it's incredibly comprehensive on the military side. But, as you said, the Arthashastra is much broader than just war.
Much broader.
Let's shift focus now to governance, statecraft more generally.
Right. Because the Arthashastra is really a complete guide, isn't it? A treatise on the whole theory and practice of governing. For rulers, for statesmen.
Yeah.
Covering everything.
And a core principle seems to be just, well, maintaining law and order. Sounds basic, but he goes deep.
It's foundational. Providing justice, protecting the people, that's presented as the king's #1 job. Their welfare and his own power are tied together.
Can't have one without the other.
Pretty much. Without basic law and order, a stable state just can't function.
Now, Kautilya often gets tagged as a realist. His political thinking definitely reflects that, right? It's not exactly idealistic.
No, not idealistic in the way we might think. He emphasizes the need for constant vigilance. Rulers have to be aware of threats, internal and external.
Always watching your back.
In a sense, yes. And being strategically flexible in diplomacy, knowing when to bend, when to be firm, and, yeah, when force is necessary for the state to survive. It's very pragmatic, almost Machiavellian, some would say.
We mentioned espionage under military strategy, but it seems just as vital, maybe even more so, for his overall idea of governance.
Absolutely central. It's worth revisiting. That spy network isn't just for wartime. It's crucial for gathering info on your own subjects, on potential internal rivals, as well as foreign enemies.
To anticipate trouble.
Exactly. You anticipate threats, maintain control, just generally stay ahead of the curve. Know what's happening everywhere, within and without.
And the state's strength wasn't just about security forces, right? Economics played a big part.
A huge part. Kautilya saw it as a key duty of the ruler to actively promote agriculture, trade, industry.
Why was that so important?
Because a thriving economy means stability. It keeps the population happier, more loyal. A prosperous kingdom is just fundamentally stronger, more resilient.
And presumably, a strong economy helps pay for that strong military we talked about.
Exactly. It's all interconnected in his system.
Now, thinking about society itself, Kautilya wasn't pushing for, like, total equality, was he?
No, the Arthashastra definitely reflects the hierarchical society of ancient India. It acknowledges that structure. But it advises the ruler to skillfully balance the interests of these different social groups. The goal is to maintain overall order, prevent any one group from getting too powerful or too unhappy. It's about managing those dynamics.
And underlying a lot of this advice, there seems to be a pretty clear-eyed, maybe even cynical view of human nature.
I'd say pragmatic, definitely. He recognized that people are often driven by self-interest.
So the ruler needs to expect that.
Needs to be aware of it, yeah. Be prepared for people to act in ways that benefit themselves, sometimes even at the state's expense. Kind of a trust but verify approach, maybe.
Makes sense. Okay, finally, on governance. The inner circle. Ministers, advisors, how important were they?
Absolutely critical. It wasn't enough for the king himself to be wise. He needed wise counsel around him.
And how should he choose them?
Kautilya stressed choosing based on competence, on merit. Not just loyalty, though loyalty mattered, but real ability. Surrounding yourself with smart, experienced people dedicated to the state was essential for good governance.
Okay, so that's a really comprehensive blueprint for running a state. Now, let's zoom out a bit and talk about the strategic thinking that runs through the whole Arthashastra. It's more than just reacting, isn't it?
Oh, much more. While military strategy is obviously a big piece, his strategic thinking covers everything: politics, economics, diplomacy. The core idea is constant preparedness for anything
Hmm.
and ensuring the state is resilient, strong in the long run.
And a key part of that resilience seems to be flexibility, adaptability.
Exactly. A ruler has to be able to adapt. Internal situations change, the international scene changes. You can't be rigid.
So it's not just responding, but anticipating.
Anticipating challenges, yes, and having flexible plans ready, being able to adjust quickly. Agility is really vital for long-term survival and success.
We keep coming back to intelligence gathering. In this broader strategic context, it seems even more significant.
It really does. Kautilya's focus on spies and informants, you can almost see it as an early form of data analytics or state surveillance.
How so?
Well, today governments use massive amounts of data for national security, tracking political moods, social trends. The underlying principle is the same. Knowing what's going on is absolutely critical for strategy.
And his advice on alliances, dealing with other states, still relevant today.
Remarkably so, I think. His idea of choosing allies based on shared interests and long-term strategic value, that's timeless.
Like modern coalitions or trade deals.
Exactly. International coalitions, trade agreements, military pacts. The basic logic of finding mutually beneficial partnerships echoes Kautilya loud and clear.
Okay, now here's a potentially tricky one. The divide and conquer strategy. That phrase has negative connotations today.
It certainly does. Exploiting divisions among your rivals to get ahead.
Mm.
It's viewed pretty critically now, ethically speaking.
But Kautilya saw it differently.
He saw it pragmatically, as a tool you might need in a competitive world. Ethically complex for us, sure, but you can still arguably see echoes of that kind of thinking in modern politics or corporate competition, even if it's more subtle.
And his idea of conflict itself wasn't just about armies clashing.
Not at all. He had a very broad definition.
Hmm.
Conflict could be economic pressure, diplomatic maneuvering, psychological games.
Which sounds a lot like.
Hybrid warfare, exactly. The modern concept where states or other actors use a whole range of tactics, not just military force, to achieve their goals. Kautilya was way ahead of the curve there.
So for Kautilya, being strategically sound meant total preparedness. Military, economic, political.
All of it. Constant readiness wasn't just about troops. It was about economic resilience, political stability, the ability to handle all sorts of crises.
Which leads us, I think, to maybe the most fascinating and definitely the most debated part, ethics and leadership in the Arthashastra. Given some of the ruthless stuff we've discussed, where does morality even fit in?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? The text absolutely forces you to confront the ethical side of power and governance.
It seems complicated.
It is, because while Kautilya is all about pragmatism, realism, he's still grappling with the moral complexities involved.
He definitely leans towards that political realism school, right? The state's interest comes first, even if actions seem questionable.
That's a fair way to put it. He doesn't really shy away from suggesting things like deception or manipulation if they serve what he sees as the state's greater good.
But it's not just anything goes.
No, and this is key. Even within that pragmatic view, he still emphasizes justice and ethical governance as the ultimate goal. A stable society, he argues, needs law and order as its foundation.
So the pragmatism serves a purpose.
Right. Think of it like this. His pragmatism is meant to serve the goal of a stable, prosperous state for the people. The end goal matters.
Which is interesting because he also talks a lot about the ruler's personal integrity. It seems almost contradictory.
It can seem that way. But Kautilya believed a ruler lacking self-control, someone ruled by anger or greed, ultimately screws things up for everyone. They risk their own position and the whole state.
Self-control is key for good decisions.
Crucial. Managing desires, controlling emotions, it leads to more rational choices. It connects directly to modern ideas about, say, emotional intelligence in leadership.
It feels like he's constantly walking this tightrope between effective action, which might be harsh, and the underlying ethics.
Exactly. That tension is always there. And his pragmatic take on these dilemmas, balancing national security versus individual rights, maybe, or economic growth versus the environment, these are still the kinds of tough trade-offs leaders face today. It makes you think.
Did he lay out specific qualities a good ruler needs, beyond just being cunning?
Oh, yes, definitely.
Yeah.
He emphasizes self-control, discipline, managing desires, making decisions based on reason and wisdom, and again, surrounding oneself with good, capable ministers.
What about courage?
Courage is essential, yes.
Yeah.
But it has to be tempered with wisdom, understanding the consequences of your actions, not just blind bravery.
And his overall view of ethics, it seems almost utilitarian. The welfare of the people is the main goal.
That's a good way to frame it. The outcomes, especially the well-being of the citizens,
Yeah.
often justify the means in his philosophy. But ideally, those outcomes are focused on the people's welfare.
Did he warn against specific character flaws?
He did. He details vices rulers must avoid. Anger, because it leads to bad judgment, alienates people. Greed, because it leads to corruption, exploitation, even excessive lust or indulgence, because it impairs judgment, makes you neglect your duties.
And he keeps coming back to justice.
Fundamentally, the ruler as the protector of justice, ensuring laws are applied fairly, consistently. That's vital for social order, public trust. Lose that faith, and the state weakens.
Did he mention education?
Yes, he stressed that too. A ruler needs to be well-educated in sciences, philosophy, the art of governance itself to make informed decisions and steer clear of those vices.
So putting it all together, Kautilya's leadership framework, it's very much grounded in knowledge, strategic intelligence, this realpolitik view.
Exactly. It contrasts sharply with purely idealistic views. The key traits are wisdom, discernment gained through education and understanding people and knowing the right tool for the job, diplomacy, force, negotiation.
And moral character.
Moral character matters, but again, pragmatically. While he advocates shrewd tactics when needed, the central concern is always the state's well-being. Uphold morals when you can, but prioritize the kingdom's interests if you must.
But there's also this idea of leadership as service.
Yes, surprisingly modern in a way.
Hmm.
He suggests a ruler's success is ultimately measured by whether they improve the lives of their subjects. That resonates today.
And the advisors, again, choosing them
I
on
say
merit.
Meritocracy, yes.
Hmm.
Choosing advisors for competence, not just because they're loyal buddies. That's a cornerstone of good governance, ancient or modern.
It really sounds like, despite the huge time gap, these core ideas about wisdom, integrity, in his context, service, strategic thinking, they still hold up.
They really do. The fundamental challenges of power, strategy, balancing interests, they haven't changed that much, have they?
Well, this has been a really fascinating deep dive into Kautilya's Arthashastra. We've covered his thoughts on military strategy, the complexities of governance, those tricky ethics of leadership, and the strategic thinking woven through it all. It's pretty clear, isn't it? Even though it's ancient, it still offers so much insight into power, decision-making, relevant stuff for anyone listening today.
Absolutely. And what's particularly striking, I think, is how that pragmatic approach gives you this stark but really illuminating look at leadership realities. It sort of cuts through the idealism.
It gets down to brass tacks.
Yeah, focuses on what Kautilya saw as essential for survival and prosperity.
So maybe a final thought for everyone listening. Considering all these insights from the Arthashastra, how might those principles, preparedness, strategic thinking, that constant tension between pragmatism and ethics, how might they apply to challenges you face in your work, your life?
It makes you think, doesn't it?
It really does, about how much this ancient wisdom still echoes in our very modern world.
What stood out to you most in this discussion? What resonated with you?
How do Kautilya's ideas apply to the world today? What lessons can we learn from him?
This is just the beginning of our journey through the Arthashastra.
There's so much more to explore.
We encourage you to keep thinking about these ideas.
And see how they can help us understand our own world.
And on that note, we'll wrap up our deep dive for today.
Thank you for joining us. We'll be back next time with more insights from the Arthashastra.
Until then, keep learning.